this is Nerikull Murakami, and as you can tell from the screen, I'm going to do something a little different. This is sort of a retro review on the Commodore 64. Found this lovely little emulator called Vice 64, which it's probably one of the best Commodore 64 emulators I've found. Gonna have to search out a little to find the website because I'm sure they probably still exist. But if you're an old Commodore 64 user like I used to be when I was growing up, yeah, God, I'm old. You're definitely going to want to get your hands on this. There's also a lot of ROMs there are a lot of software that's still out there, tons of games. This was one of the things about the Commodore 64. Tons and tons and tons of games. A lot of them were the wonderful old arcade games from back in the day. And there were a whole load of great original games. And you have to keep in mind, this was back in the 80s when this was the big thing. And I distinctly remember a whole lot of incredible games that I would spend hours playing these games. So, in this video, I'm going to just throw a few games out there and talk about them. Some of my favorites. So strap in and set the Wayback Machine to the 1980s and the wonderful gaming world of the Commodore 64. So the first game I've selected here is Omega Race. This was actually a port of an arcade game that it was a very good game. It may not look like a whole lot, but when you take into consideration the controls, which were basically your fire button and a rotary, just like a 360-degree rheostat, rotary controller. This made things very interesting insofar as, the flexibility of your control. Ported over to a home system or even something like the Commodore 64, you had your joystick, or in the case of this emulator, I didn't do good. You ended up using a joystick. But it was still a game that would keep me going for hours on end. Okay, I want to show this for a point. In the 80s, as is today, there's always this big concern about piracy of programs and blah, blah, blah. But it was very rampant in the 80s. There wasn't a whole hell of a lot of software encoding that would effectively stop this sort of piracy. So you ended up with seeing a lot of these sort of compilations. This also was a good example of the capabilities of the Commodore 64, not only for graphics but for sound. Just listen to that music. This is the sort of thing that really brought to the fore of why the Commodore 64 was the home PC to have during its time. It really was an incredible machine. This was also something that was endemic of the program packaging of the 80s, especially the cracked programs. They would throw in these little programs to speed up the load-up times, which were notoriously slow. So our next game here is Ghostbusters, which is not surprising given, the 1980s being such a huge film for the 80s. This was designed, obviously it says down there, by David Crane, who did a ton of awesome games for Activision. Yay! Activision did a bunch of great games in the 80s, and I hope to touch on more in subsequent episodes. This particular version of Ghostbusters was interesting, as it had you set up an account and basically build up your franchise while going through a lot of the storyline that was in the movie. That is, to save New York City from, all the ghosts and ghouls. The Marshmallow Man did show up, and as I understand, the whole thing with the gatekeeper and Zool and crossing the streams and all that actually did happen towards the end. I know, big spoiler, right? But myself personally, I never got that far because I really sucked at this game. But just for archival purposes, I'm putting it into this video. You had to select your car, which I almost always selected the 1963 hearse because it, of course, fit, being, it was a Ghostbusters game. You had to go through with your budget and whatever you had left to get yourself the energy detector, the image intensifier, the marshmallow sensor. Yes, you'll be able to find s'mores. Ghost bait, I guess that would help if, and I'll explain later why that would be important. I usually grabbed about 3 traps. That was always a good start at the beginning. And the ghost vacuum. This is another one of those little helpers that was very good to have in the game. So you got your equipment set up and you started. You would go through the city as, well, this is pretty obvious, to any building that was actually being attacked by ghosts. And it gave you this lovely little perspective of the streets. I do apologize for the sound quality. For whatever reason, this seems to have recorded mono out of the left speaker. So you would go to the building where Slimer, hey, there he is, would be floating around. You position your guys and try to use your streams to get a little ghosty goo there underneath the trap. And once you manage to do that, which apparently I am taking my sweet time, you get him in position, open the trap, and ta-da! You got yourself a ghost. Also, there was something, you notice these ghosts here coming out of the corners. This will come into play later. The one thing you're trying to do is avoid allowing them to get to where Zool is. Oh, there goes another alarm. This will also come into play later during these little segments where you're traveling. It comes into play of why you've got the little spirit vacuum, because the ghosts will come from the top, as I show by my mouse moving a little earlier. I don't think I pointed out during the last little battle there that when you capture your ghost, the game took advantage of the Commodore 64's ability to actually do speech synthesis. I don't know of any other little home computer or video game system that actually could do this. And there you go. So, as I said before, these little ghosts that you see on the map, they're all trying to get to that main building, and as you drive along, they're going to come from the top, and you have to be closer. Oh, crap. You have to get closer to them, click your button, and they will be inhaled by the vacuum. So, it may seem like the first part of the game is basically just this, over and over. And you do get money for each successful catch. Now, I'm heading back to the Ghostbusters HQ because, for one, I filled all my traps. And if you ever fail to capture a ghost, you're going to get slimed. I'm going to demonstrate that a little later here in this play. I'm still trying to remember. You have to remember, this is the first time I think in several years I've actually played this game, so my memory's a little foggy on what exactly you're supposed to do with stuff like the ghost bait. I don't know if that helps when you're on the road and you're trying to capture these guys, but there obviously was a reason why I grabbed the ghost bait. Oh yeah, you see where it turns purple. That means that there is a haunting about to happen. So keep your, there we go. Zoop. And every time you do dispatch any of these free roaming ghosts in the city like that, it prevents them from getting to the main building with Zool, and also keeps the PK energy from getting too high too fast. I don't believe I noticed that before, that the graphics are a little bugged. And I missed. Uh-oh. So, it's basically the gist of the game. So I'm including this particular game called Fast Eddie, which was done by Sirius, who I do believe did have a track record of actually doing some pretty good games, but this was not one of them. You'll notice the year was 1982, and this was getting close to the great video game crash of the early 80s, and it's fairly obvious why the crash happened. The industry ended up with a lot of games like this, which were just cheaply made. They almost looked like they were thrown together. They were very simple. And granted, yes, the technology of that day pretty much lent itself to simplistic games. But, you know, I know kids today would look at this and probably ask some old fart like me, "You actually played these games?" Yeah, basically we did. So this next game is very interesting because it really shows how much time has passed. This is Breakdance, a game that was released in 1984 by Epix. They did some fantastic sports games, mainly Olympic-style games, but this definitely was not one of the better games. It, of course, was a game based on the popularity of breakdancing. It was really huge at that time. Basically, your guy has 5 moves, depending on how you move your joystick or whether or not you hit your button. Alright, do I have it? Yeah, okay. So, you know, basically those are your moves. It's just kind of weird. It's like, looky over there. Spin, squat. You know, I just basically, that's the way I looked at it. Look over there. Taking a dump. Look over there again. Taking a dump. Hey, spasm. Big dump. I don't know exactly what sort of moves they were supposed to be, but I guess the programmers must have thought it was actually breakdancing. The whole point of this game was this was almost like a Simon type game. You basically had to mimic the moves done by the computer-controlled character on the left in the purple. That was it. How popular this game was is anyone's guess, because I don't really recall ever playing this thing a lot. And not only that, that supposed soundtrack, I don't know if that was supposed to emulate the early sort of music that people did breakdancing to. I don't know. But, yeah, this is what we had in the 80s. So actually, one of the very first games I ever played on a PC, as it were, was the next game I'm going to be showing, called Sammy Lightfoot. I initially played this game on on an Apple II in high school. Yeah, that's how old I am. I was using an Apple II in high school. Think about that. When you're messing with your iPad and all that. Alright, I'm gonna before I get into some crazy old man grumbly ranting kind of thing. But this particular game would keep me occupied for quite a while. Even when I did get it for the Commodore 64, it just was one of these weird games I just could not stop playing. And again, it was deceptively simple. Your whole point was to get from point A to point B. But it was never that simple. You had to overcome the obstacles, like the ball that was rolling towards you. You had to get across the chasms. You had to jump up on the trampolines, which actually, to get yourself up there, you had to hold the action button. Again, pointing out that this was the 80s, and for the most part, you had a joystick with one button. That was it. And that was it for me. Oh, God. It made his hairpiece spin. How bizarre is that? But, yeah, that was basically what we had. You know, was the joystick and a single action button. Actually, looking at this, I think this was a game that I saw long before I encountered the original Donkey Kong. But it was very much in the same vein as Donkey Kong. God, how cheesy is that? But you had, you know, different levels and different things you had to do to get up to the end of the level. I'm not gonna go through the whole thing, because let's face it, as I said, I haven't played these games in years, and I'm not exaggerating about that. So getting through to the end would probably take far more time than I'm willing to actually devote, not just to the playing, but to the editing of the video. But it was a very good game. I really did enjoy it and played it quite often. So stay on my right foot for the Commodore 64. So any Commodore 64 owner from back in the day would probably slap me if I did not include this game, Boulder Dash. It was, if you remember Dig Dug, well, then you're probably also old or getting into that. But this was an incredible game. I believe it spawned a few different variants on the same game. But just in and of itself, it was a really good game. It was, how do I even describe it? I can't really say it was like, it was something of a maze game, but the whole point was your little character right there has to dig through the earth to find all of these different little crystals, all the while avoiding getting crushed by rocks or attacked by monsters or energy squares or something. And again, this was one of those games which was on site. It was deceptively simple. You actually had to think and strategize, you know, the deeper you got into the game, on how exactly you were going to get these little crystals and also make your way back to where the exit was, or is. The exit sometimes would move. That little flashing of the screen was your indicator that you had fulfilled the minimum. In the early levels, of course, you had far more crystals than the minimum, so you were always, you always got a decent score for the first level or two. But as time went on, and you went deeper into the game, you would actually find it a little bit more difficult to get all the crystals. Not only were you dealing with the avoidance of getting yourself crushed by the rocks while getting these little diamond crystal things, you also had to keep your eye on the clock up there. Oh, look, there's one of those little monsters indicated by the flashing square. I'm not sure exactly what that thing was supposed to be, but I'm guessing it was a bad thing. So I'm going to avoid it. I also believe... I don't think you had a weapon of sorts. You basically just had to strategize and work your way around. And again, this was the thing that really got me about gaming back in the day. These days, you may look at the games and say, "Ah, well, that is so simple, it's almost cheesy." But the games only looked simple. If I devoted, say, a half hour just to this game alone, it would prove my point, because you had to really work, in the upper levels to even negotiate a short distance. Now you remember in that first level I went through, the exit was like right there. It's not the case here. You actually have to move your way back to get to the exit. I'm going to say that I completely forgot that point and ended up dicking around trying to find the exit, completely forgetting, of course, hey, why not check back where you started? But, again, I haven't played this in years, so there you go. This particular area is going to illustrate perfectly why you need a strategy. Because you see how everything seems to be oddly placed, almost random. It's just sort of there. It's not as random as it seems, because I've just trapped myself. I can't move any of these boulders, and I'm pretty well screwed. But despite that, this is a fun game, and maybe I'll revisit a little later. So to round this out, I'm going to go into a game that I really, really enjoyed back in the day, Gyrus. This was another one of those games that just totally destroyed me when it came to how many quarters I plopped into the machine. It was a very distinct game. There were a lot of these space kind of based blow up the enemy ships kind of games, but this one, as you notice, the difference is instead of keeping your ship at the bottom of the screen, you had a 360-degree circle to work with, shooting towards the center of the screen where all the ships would congregate. And once all the ships, or as many ships as you did not shoot, got in to the center of the screen, then the wave would actually begin. But if you managed to kill them off ahead of time, you would get little bonus points, starting out at about 1,000 points. The whole point of the game, of course, was to get to Earth. And, if you got to Earth, then kudos to you, and it would start all over again, faster, more difficult, etc., etc. The one thing, again, that I've said this before about the games back in the day, is they were deceptively simple. Oh, I died there. Unlike the games of today, of you know 2014, or even anything from you know 2000 onward, there wasn't a whole lot of complexity to it. Neptune, yay! You had a simple stated goal, and you just had to hack and slash your way through until you made it to your goal. And oftentimes, you could go through the same situation again and again and again, and it would just become more difficult. The challenge would be the difficulty. And you may notice that these ships are blinking. They're not staying static on the screen. This, of course, is giving away the limitations of the technology of the day. You could only have X amount of objects. 3 warps to Uranus. That's what she said! Sorry, I had to say it. But, yeah, it was a sign of the technological limitations of the Commodore 64. Despite that, the C64, at least in my view, was probably one of the single best, I guess you would call it a PC, because you could do PC-like stuff with it. Granted, there was no internet as such. You could hook up a modem, access bulletin boards, and so forth. But this was where the C64 really strutted its stuff. Graphics and sound. No other machine of its time could match it. And I, for one, feel very privileged to have been an owner of a Commodore 64, and also very happy to have found this wonderful emulator. So check in the description. I'm going to put a link to where you can get Vice, but as far as getting software in the games, that's your own lookout. It's there on the internet, not too difficult to find. But go out there and enjoy all that the Commodore 64 had to offer. So, until next time, I'm Nerikull Murakami, and let the computer say it for me.